You always were the difficult one, Joe. This is why we didn't tell you. That's what my mother said, after they faked my death on paper. No warning, no apology, just that brittle smile and a check already in flames. They tore my name from the will, erased me like a typo in a family they'd rather forget. But Grandpa didn't forget. He left a key, and a sentence that would change everything. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, like you were edited out of the photo before it was even taken, drop a comment with 1. And if you've never had to earn your place at the table, consider yourself lucky. Leave a 0, because sometimes the people who bury you are still alive. The envelope was yellowed, unsealed, and tucked between pages of a Hemingway novel I hadn't opened since college. It fell out with the weight of something long forgotten, landing face down on the rug like it knew I wouldn't be ready. I didn't touch it for a full minute. Outside, rain whispered across the fire escape, soft and persistent like breath-fogging glass. Grandpa once told me, "Some truths take their time, and some take a storm." The sky outside was gray enough to qualify. The apartment smelled of old coffee grounds and whatever scent the radiator decided to emit that day. Something metallic, warm, and vaguely nostalgic. I sat on the arm of the couch, envelope in hand, Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls still half open in my lap. I remembered picking it up at a used bookstore with Grandpa when I was 16. He said I wouldn't understand it until I'd loved someone I couldn't save. At the time, I thought that was dramatic. Now I wasn't so sure. The letter inside was handwritten in that looping, careful print of his, dated 2 years ago. My name at the top. If they burn what I left you, use what I gave you. No hello, no signature, just that single sentence, coiled like a spring. I read it again. And again. The key wasn't hard to find. Wrapped in linen, tucked behind mismatched socks in the top drawer. The metal had darkened, but the etched fleur-de-lis pattern on the bow was still sharp. He'd given it to me on my 18th birthday, with a wink and no explanation. That night, I didn't sleep. I made chamomile tea and let it go cold. I turned the letter over 5 times and watched the lights from passing cars stencil across my ceiling. I didn't call anyone, not even Tessa, especially not Tessa. The next morning, a formal envelope from the law offices of Crenshaw and Bell arrived under my door. A will reading. Spokane. Attendance expected. I didn't pack with care. I packed with instinct. Jeans, a sweater or two, Grandpa's Hemingway, and the key. The envelope, too, folded into the book like a nervous bookmark. Somewhere in the hallway closet, I found my old brown suitcase. It still had a baggage tag from LAX tucked into the handle. I smiled. Grandpa had picked me up from that trip. He'd brought a thermos of cider and a wool blanket and told me that good grandfathers showed up early, but great ones never left the airport parking lot. While searching for gloves, I stumbled across a letter from Tessa, stuffed inside a winter scarf I hadn't worn in years. Written in loopy high school cursive, the ink slightly smudged at the folds. "We should take the train to Maine this summer," it said. "Just us. We can stay up late, eat nothing but peach cobbler and gas station chips. No parents, no pretending." I didn't remember her writing that. Or maybe I'd just forgotten to keep it close. The paper felt soft, worn. I didn't throw it away. Later that evening, I lit a candle on the windowsill. The wax pooled slow and golden. My fingers brushed the brass key again, then closed around it like a promise. I could hear Grandpa's voice, not words this time, but the slow baritone hum he'd use when boiling water or folding laundry. A sound that made the silence feel full instead of empty. 10 years ago, on a Thanksgiving just like this one, Grandpa had handed me the carving knife when my father wouldn't speak to me. We carved in silence, two conspirators in cranberry-stained aprons, while the rest of the table avoided our eyes. That night, he tucked the wishbone into my coat pocket and said, "Make it count, Joe." One more memory floated in before sleep. A winter evening, me and Grandpa in the den, logs snapping in the fireplace. I'd asked him if it was ever worth telling the truth when no one wanted to hear it. He'd said, "The truth doesn't always arrive dressed like a hero. Sometimes it limps, sometimes it burns." I hadn't known what that meant. Until now. I found myself opening the bottom drawer of the desk, the one I rarely touched. Inside was a postcard from Cannon Beach. Me and Grandpa, wind-blown and grinning, the ocean a blur behind us. That had been our last trip together. He told me, "The tide always returns, Joe. So will you." Back then, I thought he meant it as comfort. Now I felt it as a summons. I reached for the linen drawer, and there it was. The faded plaid tablecloth Grandpa used every holiday, even when it was just the two of us. I folded it slowly, the fibers fraying at the corners. It smelled faintly of cinnamon and cedar. I tucked it between the layers of clothing in my suitcase, a quiet rebellion against forgetting. My train ticket flutters onto the floor. The departure time is 6:14 a.m. Rain taps like warning fingers on the window. There's no doorbell at my parents' house, only the sound of your own hesitation before you knock. The steps creaked under my boots, slick with late November rain. I stood before the familiar front door, remembering how the wood once had a knothole shaped like Texas. It had been painted over, of course. Charlene didn't tolerate imperfections. My suitcase, damp at the corners, rested against my calf. The key in my pocket pressed sharp against my thigh, grounding me. The last time I stood here, I held more than a suitcase. I carried an apology in my throat, so brittle, it splintered before I even spoke. That was 2 years ago, and Tessa's engagement dinner. I arrived uninvited. I left before dessert. The door opened with the smell of clove and lemon polish. "Joe," my mother said, voice professionally pleasant. Her sweater was pumpkin-colored, earrings tiny cornucopias. "You're early." "I caught an earlier train," I lied. The truth was, I couldn't stay in Portland a second longer once the letter came. Grandpa's voice on paper still echoed in my chest. "Let them burn it. Then use what I left you." Charlene ushered me in. The house looked staged for a magazine. Orange garlands, flickering candles, a bowl of cinnamon-scented pine cones by the staircase. Every surface hummed with curated nostalgia. Except Grandpa's favorite recliner, the faded blue one near the fireplace, was missing. In its place stood a faux orchid in a ceramic pot. Loss isn't always loud. Dad nodded at me from the hallway, arms crossed. "Joe?" His voice, low. No hug. No, "How have you been?" Just an inventory of disapproval. Tessa arrived 5 minutes later, heels clicking like punctuation. Her coat was ivory, hair in a sleek ponytail, smile warm enough to photograph. "You made it," she said. "That's good." Before I could answer, a man in a charcoal suit stepped forward from the dining room. "Josephine Alden?" he asked, briefcase in hand. "I'm Arnold Halpern, Arthur's attorney." I blinked. "We're doing this now?" "The family is assembled," he said. "No time like the present." The dining room table was set for Thanksgiving, though it was still 2 days away. China plates, cloth napkins, wine glasses turned upside down. Mr. Halpern took his place at the head, unfolding a packet of papers with surgical precision. He started with trinkets. To Charlene, Arthur's cufflinks and recipe box. To Richard, a vintage pocket watch, and a book on fly fishing. To Tessa, a strand of freshwater pearls and the photo albums from their summer lake house. I held my breath. Nothing for me. Not even a bookmark. Mr. Halpern cleared his throat. And finally, the residual estate, valued at approximately $38 million, is hereby bequeathed to Josephine Alden in its entirety, per the handwritten codicil notarized 2 years prior. Silence. Then a sharp hiss. My father stood. With 2 fingers, he pulled the check from the envelope and lit a match. Flames curled the paper as he dropped it into the ceramic dish on the table. My mother didn't flinch. She reached for the now empty envelope, tore it in half, then in quarters. "This," she said, voice calm, "is what betrayal looks like. Have you ever had your worth reduced to ash, right in front of the people who were supposed to protect you? If you've ever watched love turn into punishment, drop a comment number 7 below. Now let's find out what I did with the only thing they couldn't burn." I watched the ashes flutter. For a second, I was 15 again, sitting at this table, trying to explain why I wanted to apply to a college out of state. My father's silence like a wall, my mother's smile like a sealed vault. And now, 2 decades later, I was still being punished for stepping out of line. Mr. Halpern looked stricken. "That document was symbolic. The legal transfer has already—" "I know," I said. My voice didn't waver. I reached into my pocket, fingers brushing the cold brass of the key. "Let them burn it!" Grandpa hadn't been speaking metaphorically. Tessa said nothing. Her eyes darted to Mom, then to me. Calculating. She always hated math, but had a knack for power equations. No one noticed the way I stood. Or maybe they did and just didn't care. The way a daughter turns invisible between the roles she's expected to play. The orchid trembled in a breeze from the vent. I touched the brass key in my pocket. Grandpa's letter said, "Let them burn it. Then use what I left you." Langford Private Vaults didn't advertise. The address was a whisper passed between old money and older secrets. The building sat behind a gate that didn't creak, wrapped in the hush of snowfall and wealth. I parked on the street and walked the rest of the way, the brass key warm in my pocket like it had chosen this moment. A guard nodded without asking my name. Inside, it smelled like dust and disuse, old paper and cold metal. The attendant behind the desk was younger than I expected, with the kind of efficiency that doesn't require friendliness. "Box number?" 17, I said, and he glanced at the key, then led me down a narrow hallway lit like a hospital ward. No windows, no sound but our footsteps. He left me in a small room. The walls were paneled, walnut dark. Box 17 waited behind a grid of identical steel doors, like mausoleums for secrets. My hands didn't shake until the lock clicked. Inside, a stack of documents, neatly bound, a velvet pouch heavy with flash drives, a folded birth certificate in acid-free plastic. On top, a note in Grandpa's handwriting. "If you're here, they've already begun rewriting you." I took everything home in a canvas tote. In my apartment, the radiator hissed with effort. I made tea without tasting it and opened my laptop. The USB flickered to life. A video launched, a static shot of Grandpa Arthur seated at his desk. The same lamp I remembered from childhood cast a half-moon glow over his papers. His eyes found the lens immediately. "If you're watching this," he began, "they tried to erase you." I hit pause. Not because I doubted him, but because the room suddenly felt too small. I walked to the window. Rain traced slow, unhurried paths down the glass. Somewhere below, a horn honked twice. The world kept moving, unaware that my life had just tilted. I remembered storms as a child, the ones that rattled the windows and sent Tessa running to Mom. I always went to Grandpa's study. He'd let me crawl beneath his desk and sit there tracing the grain of the wood, each swirl like a tiny maze. He once tapped the underside of the desk and said, "If it's ever too much out there, come find the quiet in here." And once, when I asked why he didn't just write things down for safekeeping, he'd smiled and replied, "Paper can burn, but people remember the hidden places." I pressed play again. He laid it out in clear, measured terms: the estate's finances, the trusts he'd built offshore, the property deeds already transferred in my name, through shell companies, to avoid contestation. One folder contained my birth certificate, not a copy, the original. Under my legal name, Josephine Evelyn Alden. No amendments, no corrections. Another folder held a contract for the transfer of the family's ancestral estate in Maine. I stared at the deed like it might vanish. Grandpa hadn't just left me assets. He left me proof. Names, dates, locations, routing numbers, even old receipts. He annotated nearly every page in pencil, as if expecting me to need context for the battles ahead. A handwritten sticky note fluttered loose from one of the legal briefs. Box array. They won't expect that. The phrase meant nothing to me, but the way it was underlined twice made it feel loaded. The camera flickered. Grandpa leaned closer. "Rebuilding doesn't start with revenge," he said, voice steady. "It starts with record." I sat there a long time after the video ended. The radiator clicked and hissed like it was trying to fill the silence. I looked down at the pile of paper, each one a piece of the truth that had been denied me. Proof I existed in ways they never wanted acknowledged. I picked up the deed again. The signature at the bottom was Grandpa's. His penmanship hadn't changed. He still made the J in Josephine too wide. I smiled without meaning to. In the corner of the vault's trust packet, a small map had been folded into quarters. Our house in Maine, a star scrawled in red over what used to be Grandpa's study. He had circled a bookshelf, noted dimensions. "Check behind Hemingway," it read. My kettle whistled again. Too long. I didn't move. I was already moving through the maze of memories and clues he left behind. Then my phone buzzed. My phone buzzes. New email. Blank subject. Single line inside. "They filed your death certificate." The bank teller tilted her head like she was about to offer condolences. Not a withdrawal slip. She stared at the screen, blinking more than typing. "I'm sorry," she finally said, like she'd rehearsed the phrase but never expected to use it. "There seems to be a flag on your account. A legal status note." "A what?" I leaned in, heart thudding. "A legal what?" Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. "I think it's best if you speak with a manager." It took 10 minutes, 2 whispered conversations, and a glance I caught between them that felt like a quiet panic. The manager appeared, all smooth apologies and corporate smiles, and invited me into his glass-walled office. He sat down carefully, like I might break. "Ms. Alden, according to our system, you're marked as deceased." I almost laughed. "Well, clearly I'm not." He didn't smile. "We can't allow any transactions under your name until this is resolved." Have you ever felt yourself disappear, on paper, in memory, like you never mattered? If your name was stolen, your voice silenced. Leave a number 9 below. You're not alone. Next, I started digging into the silence, and what I found changed everything. Outside, holiday lights blinked in shop windows like nothing had gone wrong. But my name, my signature, my very existence, had been wiped off paper. I left the bank with my hands stuffed deep in my coat pockets and my breath coming faster than the November air warranted. I needed answers, not apologies. The DMV was my next stop, sterile and humming with fluorescent fatigue. I took a number and sat under a flickering ceiling bulb, palms sweating. When my number was called, I approached the counter, where a young clerk with braces and acrylic nails greeted me. She typed in my social security number, then frowned. I think you need to wait a sec." 2 clicks later, she whispered, "I shouldn't show you this, but a death certificate was filed for you 2 weeks ago." She tilted the screen. There it was. My name, date of birth, cause, pending. "I'm sorry," she added softly, real sympathy creeping into her voice. "You should probably contact legal counsel." It wasn't just a mistake. It was erased. I stumbled out into the chill and leaned against a newspaper box, heart thudding. That's when I saw her again. The woman with the pale blue scarf. Across the street, standing by the same bus stop she'd been near the courthouse. She looked at me. Not through me. At me. And then she turned. I followed, but traffic pulsed between us, swallowing her silhouette before I could cross. Back home, I tried to log into every account I had. Health insurance, utilities, even my old student loan portal. One by one, I was locked out. Only the analog things remained. Files in my drawer, envelopes with return addresses long outdated. I opened the drawer with Grandpa's old checkbook, fingers brushing the spine. I used to sit beside him as a child, watching his neat penmanship balance the numbers line by line. "Order tells the truth," he'd say, "even when people lie." I pulled out a yellow legal pad and scribbled what I knew. The will, the vault, the letter, the scarf, the flag at the bank, the certificate, the woman. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a sequence. Grandpa's voice from the video echoed, "If they erase your name, don't let them erase your voice." I pulled out the flash drive again. There was a folder I hadn't opened yet. Backstitch. Inside, PDFs, copies of notarized affidavits, witness statements, photographs of original documents, and audio files, interviews, recordings. One file was labeled Red Thread. I hit play. His voice, crisp but tired, filled my apartment. "If you're listening, it means they've gone through with it. You're off the grid. That's how they win." He paused. Then, "But silence can be rewritten." The screen flickered. "My internet is disconnected." I checked the router. Nothing wrong. I turned back to my laptop and watched as the cursor began to move on its own. A window opened. A new email. No subject. No sender. They're not after the money. They're after the signature. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. My cursor hovered over the sender, but there was nothing to click. No metadata, no address, just that haunting sentence. I copied it onto a notepad, though I wasn't sure why. My fingers remembered things even when my mind didn't. Needing to confirm how far the damage went, I tried logging into my utilities account. Denied. Then my health insurance portal. Invalid credentials. Even my streaming service wanted verification I no longer had. One by one, doors were closing. Doors tied to a name that was no longer mine. I opened my filing cabinet and ran my hand across the paper folders, remembering the times Grandpa helped me set them up. "Never trust a cloud," he joked, tucking the physical copies into sleeves labeled with my careful handwriting. Taxes, insurance, education, all still intact. But what were they now, except relics? The worst part wasn't being shut out. It was the realization that someone had planned this with chilling precision. Someone who knew which systems talked to each other. Who knew erasing a person wasn't about one act. It was about 1,000 quiet ones. Outside, dusk had settled. Streetlights blinked on like slow thoughts. I made tea without thinking, mug with a cracked handle, Earl Grey, splash of almond milk. My hands trembled as I lifted the cup. The woman in the pale blue scarf lingered in my thoughts. Not just her scarf, the way she moved, like she belonged in shadows. I remembered a moment, years ago, during a Thanksgiving dinner. Her face at the edge of a family photo, slightly blurred, like she was never meant to be seen. I never knew her name. As I set the mug down, my phone buzzed again. Another email. Same format. No subject, no sender. This time it read, "You are not the first." Tessa smiled like we were still kids, and she hadn't just co-signed my erasure. The cafe 2 blocks from the courthouse hadn't changed since I left Spokane. Still dim, overplanted, and vaguely damp from oversteamed lattes. The walls were lined with mismatched art prints, Monet beside a poster for some defunct jazz band, and the air smelled faintly like regret and cinnamon. The kind of place where people held hard conversations in soft voices. I was already seated when Tessa arrived, swathed in camel wool, scarf matching her gloves, with unsettling precision. Her boots clicked lightly across the tile floor, betraying nerves she probably hoped I wouldn't notice. She sat across from me without a word, fingers fidgeting with the paper sleeve of her cup. "You look healthy," she offered. I didn't reply. My latte had cooled. A pale crust of foam ringed the top like a drawn breath held too long. I let it sit, untouched. Tessa's eyes flicked toward the window. Snow was falling, fine and slow like ash, and the glow from the holiday lights outside bled in through the glass. "Joe, I didn't know what I was signing," she began. "Dad gave me a folder. Everything was highlighted." "A death certificate doesn't usually come pre-highlighted," I said. She sighed. "He said it was trust consolidation, that it was about the foundation, not about you." "And you believed him?" "I didn't want to," she said, "but he's always been convincing. He said if I didn't sign, I'd lose everything too." "You mean the house, the inheritance?" I leaned in. "Or the illusion?" Her mouth opened and closed. A twitch at the corner of her lip gave her away. Anger or shame, or both. "You always make things so black and white. And you always smudge the edges." A beat passed. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small photo wrapped in a napkin. She slid it across the table. United States. Thanksgiving. Maybe 98. She in a dress that used to be mine, all sequins and crooked seams. Me behind a cardboard stage, holding a construction paper microphone. I remembered that skit. We wrote it on the back of grocery receipts and rehearsed in the den while Grandpa carved the turkey. "I kept it," she said quietly. I traced the edge of the photo. "We were good then." "We were kids." "Kids who didn't know how to lie yet," I said. Her hand hovered over her coffee. "You think I wanted this? To be pulled in? To lose you?" "You didn't lose me, Tessa. You signed me away." Her face crumpled, then hardened. "You always leave. That's the part you forget. You left me with them." "You think I had a choice?" My voice cracked. "I left because staying meant erasing myself before they could. Grandpa saw that. You didn't." She looked down. "He said, if we kept control, the name would stay clean." I laughed bitterly. "Clean? They filed a death certificate." "I was scared, Joe. You think I'm proud of this?" I stood up, pulling out my phone. "Number, I think you're scared now because I came back." She blinked as I pressed record. "What are you—" "Tell the truth. When did Dad start planning this?" She hesitated. "After Grandpa's third stroke. He said it was time to secure the legacy, said you were unstable, too far gone. And you just followed orders? Tessa looked at me, wounded. I followed my family. There it was, the clearest fracture between us. I chose the truth. She chose unity at any cost. I leaned over the table. I gave you my first sketchbook, remember? When you said you wanted to draw like me, you filled it in a week, said the blank pages felt like doors, and now you help lock them shut. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't speak. I'm done, I said. I won't ask you to testify, but I want you to remember something. She waited. I didn't disappear. You turned the lights off. I walked toward the exit, the door chiming faintly behind me. Outside, the snow had thickened. Footsteps disappeared in minutes, and the wind moved like a whisper through the trees. A courier stood by the bench, holding a sleek black envelope. Joe Alden, he asked. I nodded. He handed it over with a slight bow, then turned and vanished into the swirl of white. The envelope was stamped in silver, Langford Vaults. Inside, a card. Heavy, matte, embossed in deep gray. Box array, level 2. Authorization granted. Outside, a courier hands me an envelope. Langford Vaults. Box array. The fake certificate curled at the edges, then vanished in a whisper of flame. Not fury. Precision. The courthouse hallway smelled like old books and fresh toner. I waited outside courtroom 3B, my hands resting on a slim manila folder. Sylvia Orton stood beside me, adjusting her blazer cuff like it might hold secrets. Her eyes were steady, but I caught the way her jaw tightened every time someone passed by. Inside, Judge Kinley sat behind the bench, posture iron straight, lips pursed into what might have once been a smile. My parents were already seated, stiff as pew ends. My mother's brooch glinted beneath the fluorescent lights, an acorn of all things, and my father's gaze avoided mine entirely. Tessa sat at the far end, hands folded in her lap, her face unreadable. Sylvia began. She presented the video first, Grandpa's message, recorded with that calm resolve that had once helped me sleep through childhood thunderstorms. If you're watching this, he said, they tried to erase you, but you don't rebuild with revenge. You rebuild with record. Next came documents, copies of forged signatures, metadata logs from the vault entry, notarized statements about my legal status, the trust paperwork, the unaltered birth certificate, and finally, my name, mine, on a series of deeds and ownership transfers Grandpa had locked away for safekeeping. I didn't speak. I let the paper speak. Let memory speak. Let silence speak. Judge Kinley read everything, slow and thorough. He barely looked up when he said it. Restoration granted. Legal identity reinstated. Transfer of assets to original beneficiary stands. His gavel came down with a soft, deliberate thud. My mother flinched. My father stared at the floor. Tessa didn't move at all. I walked out without turning back. Snow had started to fall again, gathering in lazy spirals on the courthouse steps. Sylvia handed me the final envelope, embossed with the Alden estate seal. You won, she said. No, I replied. I reclaimed. 2 weeks later, I stood in the middle of an empty brick building on the edge of downtown. Sunlight spilled through tall windows, catching the dust midair like glitter in syrup. This would be the studio, my space. Not just for me, but for others like me. Young artists, runaways, the overlooked, the misnamed. I signed the deed at a fold-out table borrowed from the city recreation office. The pen wobbled in my hand, not from hesitation, but from awe. After everything, I could still sign my own name. That night, I brought the false certificate to the fireplace. The paper had a strange weight, too light to carry truth, too heavy to forget. I lit the corner, watched it twist into itself, orange against black. It didn't scream, it surrendered. Beside the fire sat a small keepsake box. I opened it gently. Inside, Grandpa's pocket compass, the one he gave me when I turned 10. It didn't point north anymore, but it clicked when I closed it, like punctuation. At sunrise, I returned to the studio. The cracked tile by the front door caught the morning light. I knelt, ran my fingers over it. It didn't need replacing. It didn't have to be perfect to belong. I hung Grandpa's final words just above the desk. Printed in typewriter ink, framed in wood, I sanded myself. Make something they can't erase. I still remember the way the fire curled around that paper. Quiet, final, like a door closing gently behind me. In all the noise, the lies, the signatures meant to erase me, I found that the most powerful thing I ever held onto was my own name. Family, I've learned, isn't always about blood or loyalty. It's about the choice to show up or not. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is keep building, even after they try to tear you down. If my story stayed with you, maybe take a moment to ask, what would you choose to keep, even if they tried to take it? Thank you for listening. See you in the next story.